Canada's elections commissioner says she has no evidence of April's election results that were affected by foreign interference. Commissioner Caroline Simard's preliminary report found no evidence of disinformation or voter intimidation. Her office received 7 times the total number of complaints than in the 2019 and 2021 elections, but there were fewer complaints than expected for foreign interference. The other complaints included sharing pictures of ballots or false statements about candidates. I'm now joined in studio with our correspondent, Wyatt Sharpe. Wyatt, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
So, I want to start with what exactly does the election commissioner mean by no evidence of foreign interference?
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of interesting, right? Because coming out and saying that there was no evidence feels like a pretty objective statement in a number, or sorry, subjective statement in a number of ways. Mainly just because when they're saying that it's pretty bold in terms of with all of the allegations that have been coming out
Hmm.
with respect to China, with respect to India, and various other foreign actors coming out and saying that there was no evidence seems a little bit you might be jumping the gun a little bit. I mean, of course, they have done a lot of investigation on this, and that's what they have found. But for people watching at home, I mean, what it really means is that they just didn't find anything to kind of, substantiate claims of foreign election interference. But it's very well possible that, something still could have been taking place over the course of the last election, and perhaps it just went unnoticed.
And will investigations for foreign interference happen after every election? Is that like a standard expectation?
I think certainly now with what happened in, 2019, 2021, and then of course in 2025, the reason it was such a pressing issue is because of what was uncovered with respect to, the likes of various people who were involved. I mean, there was that settlement that was reached between Global News and a journalist named Sam Cooper, and then of course a former Liberal MP by the name of Han Dong. And that was one example, for example, of just how foreign interference was put into the spotlight with respect to the 2021 election campaign. And so as a result of that, I think it's likely that people are going to talk about this more and more often now, especially in the media and in the press. And then, of course, with the respect to the likes of Michelle Simard and others, the commissioner, of course, she's going to likely play probably a bigger role on kind of the global stage as it relates to kind of just ensuring that we can move forward with fair and free elections.
Now, something that really stood out to me with the commissioner's report was that there were 7 times the amount of complaints in this election than there were in the previous elections. Why would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really has to do with how many claims that ended up being able to be substantiated, right? In both the 2021 election campaign, the 2019 election campaign, you had people like Aaron O'Toole come and testify, of course, the former Conservative leader, about possible impacts that foreign interference had over the course of his time as the Conservative Party leader in the 2021 election, where he had come out and he had said that he actually believed that it's possible it could have played a pretty substantial role with respect to the fact that he actually lost the election. He said that that might have been one of the factors at play. Of course, there's not a ton of evidence to suggest that, but I think right now it's just the fact that there's a lot of appetite amongst kind of the general population, and certainly, amongst the candidates who are running for these offices, that if there's even, a remote degree of some kind of interference that's going to be kind of intertwined in the electoral process, then it's probably, pretty reasonable to say that we should have more and more of these investigations taking place, again, to ensure that we can have fair and free elections. I think right now in Canada, right now, people are already feeling apathetic towards the government and kind of the general situation. And so, having foreign interference is obviously going to make it less likely that people feel enthusiastic, but also less likely that people will actually go out and cast their ballots.
Well, the report also mentions complaints about things like sharing ballot photos and spreading false information. How serious are these kinds of issues in the grand scheme of election integrity?
Yeah, I mean, if you go and you vote in any election campaign in Canada, anyways, whether it's federal, whether it's provincial, it's prohibited to take photos of the ballots. It's illegal. And yet people still will go and they'll post them on social media. And, there isn't really a whole lot to be said about necessarily the taking photos, with the understanding, of course, that we don't necessarily know the reasoning behind why that was done. But I think right now, kind of the bigger picture on all of this is just the fact, I mean, you you saw even at the G7 that happened in Kananaskis, Alberta, where they invited the likes of Narendra Modi, who is, of course, the Prime Minister of India. It was really, a kind of a center stage issue, if you will, at the G7, because the bigger question is what kind of a role do kind of these figures, perhaps like Narendra Modi, or, not even necessarily people as high as him, but other kind of, civil servants within the Indian government and people who just don't have necessarily a huge title attached to their name, but they're still involved with the government. Kind of what role do they play in some of these allegations that we've seen? And of course, again, with the commissioner's report, she's saying that there's no evidence that any of this happened in the most recent election, but that shouldn't necessarily give a free pass to some of the allegations that took place from, the 2021 election or the 2019 election, because certainly if it happened in those elections, it's very much possible that it could happen again in the future.
Now, I want to circle back to something that you just said, people sharing ballot photos on social media. How big of a role do you think social media has played in sharing photos of ballots and even spreading false information?
Yeah, I mean, again, the sharing photos of ballots is something that's not allowed, but I don't necessarily know if it's a huge issue. Like, I don't think, someone sees a ballot on social media. I don't think it's going to persuade someone to vote one way or the other. Maybe, it could increase awareness of people going into the ballot box, knowing kind of what to expect. But again, on that front, I don't necessarily know if it's a huge issue. I think the second part of your question with respect to social media is probably the bigger, impact that could be had. Misinformation obviously, runs pretty strong on social media, and people, whether, it's through the algorithms that are on various social media applications, or whether it's from, paid advertisements now, even with things like artificial intelligence, for example, that is making it more and more easy to essentially, portray people saying things who aren't actually the correct people. So those are examples of that. And you saw, and, I see even just as a social media user going on social media sometimes and seeing various companies using tools like artificial intelligence to try and portray various politicians, various candidates saying really, obscene, obnoxious things
Hmm.
to try and hurt their chances in the election. And that's not even necessarily an example of foreign election interference so much as, that can happen domestically at home. Even people are seeing that occur even by their own opponents who are running in the same race as them.
Well, and on that, do you think that the rise in complaints signals growing public concern about election interference, or just people are starting to speak up more?
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because, of course, the only data we have on that is really just word of mouth and public opinion polling with respect to how Canadians actually feel towards the issue. People really are, with respect to this idea of ensuring that we have free and fair elections, trying to just ensure that we do, right? I mean, especially if you look to the 2020 presidential election, when you have people like the President of the United States at the time coming out and saying that the election was stolen. Of course, there was no evidence or kind of basis to support some of those claims that he was making. But when you have people at the highest level and at the highest offices, really in the world as a whole, coming out and making some of these claims, it really kind of begs the question of, can we actually trust our institutions and our systems? And so the foreign interference between, whether it's China, whether it's India, or again, various other foreign actors, is certainly just another example of that. And so people are going to be looking, they're going to be hopefully looking for some solutions, because I think one of the biggest things is, you don't just want to wait for more foreign interference to happen in the next election campaign. And one thing that people have been criticizing the commissioner, Michelle Simard, for specifically is that she really didn't come out with any strategies to prohibit this from going forward in the future, and kind of ways to ensure that foreign interference isn't perpetrated in, the upcoming elections, because it's not even just a federal election thing. This very much could happen as well on a provincial level in the various provinces. We haven't really seen any major examples of that as of yet, but certainly there's reason to believe that it's possible that could happen.
And how confident should Canadians feel in the integrity of their electoral system after this report?
Yeah, and I mean, right now, I think if you're just going based off of what the report itself said, I think it's good news, and I think Canadians can rest assured that at least, in the long term, perhaps that people can go out and vote, and there's not necessarily going to be any, strategic impact as to how people can go out and vote, in what ways, when people are voting, they're able to cast their ballots. Like, I think generally speaking, right now, Canadians can take this report as like cautiously optimistic, perhaps, like looking at it, there's nothing in it that should make people worried necessarily. It's what could potentially come. And so if you look beyond the report again to previous elections in Canada and previous examples of foreign election interference, again, China, India, and other foreign actors, that's kind of when people might start to get concerned, because it's kind of this sentiment, right, that if they did it again, or if they did it before rather, they can very much do it again in upcoming elections. And right now, I mean, the polarization levels in Canada, the United States, and other countries are certainly increasing, and kind of the impact as well that, foreign actors are able to play in various countries' democracies is increasing as well. If you look to the geopolitical conflicts right now, whether it's Iran, whether it's Ukraine,
Mhm.
I mean, these are places where there's a lot at stake in these countries. And so if a country like Canada, if a country like the United States decides to get involved, I mean, even with Iran, for example, threatening to assassinate President Trump, for example, in the United States, that's not necessarily an example of electoral
Mhm.
election interference, but certainly an example of foreign interference. And so that's just an example of when a Western liberal democracy tries to do something that is deemed unacceptable by countries who don't embrace democratic values, they will take whatever action that they deem necessary to try and take action against it.
Well, Wyatt, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you.